Dr. Joe Danyo was a driving force for this organization. He was one of the original founding members of the AAHS. He started the association with a like-minded group of surgeons, and he chaired the first meeting in 1971 in, I believe, Montreal. His emphasis was always on teaching, but most importantly on inclusivity. And that's been his profound effect on this organization, is inclusivity. And I can think of no greater person to represent this concept than Dr. Dan Nagle. Dan has been a great friend, mentor for me. He received his MD from the University of Brussels. He then did his orthopedic residency at Northwestern in Chicago, continued his education at Louisville at the time when Louisville was the premier program in the world. He trained in hand surgery and microsurgery at that time, and then after that, he continued his education doing traveling fellowship with Guy Fouché and then Dieter Buck-Gramko, and finally with Millender and Nailbuff, who were at the time the only probably and best rheumatoid surgeons in the country. So his training is universal, which reflects his leadership as well, as you can see. He's a professor now, I think, emeritus, unfortunately, for all of us, but professor emeritus in Chicago. He's done a number of peer-reviewed publications. More importantly, he's been invited around the world to speak in probably every continent and every nation. He's trained countless residents and fellows, but most importantly, he's a leader. He's been the president of the ASRM, the ASSH. He's currently the president of the IFSH. There's no greater advocate for hand surgeons in the United States than Dan. He's contributed countless hours to make sure that we get reimbursed for what we do. And he's done it on his own dime, so to speak. And I think what I found most amazing about Dan is that when I served on the council with him, he was the most inclusive and the most inviting and the most attentive man that you will ever meet. So with that, Dan, please come to the podium.
Thanks, David. I'm glad you all got out of bed here to hear a little bit of this. And I want to meet that guy he just introduced because I don't know who he is. But anyway, so thank you so much, and thank you for being here. Great honor to give the Danyo lecture. And what David said obviously is true. He's the founder of this great organization. But interestingly enough, is he up there? Yeah. What you may not know was that he was really into the economics of hand surgery. He had a very successful practice. And when he retired, you'll see on this vest, he's got SCORE. And that's Service Corps of Retired Executives. And so up until 2019, he was a mentor to young executives. So it sort of makes sense, as I stand up here, that I talk to you about economics and physician value. So that's what we're going to do. Let me get my little thing. No, I have to use this one. Sorry. Okay. So we're going to talk about physician value. And as you may know, if you looked at the program, this is called physician value from deity to commodity. And so I thought what I should do, at least, is explain a little bit how I came up with the idea of deity. Why would I think that we're deities? Obviously, we know all the cardiac surgeons think they're deities, but we're not. So I need a little explanation. So what we need for that is we need to get in our DeLorean and our time machine, and then we need to go back in time to Saqqara, Egypt, around 2625 BC. That's the famous step pyramid. That was the first building. It was the largest building in the world at that time, made out of cut stone. And that particular building was created, or the architect for that was a man named Imhotep. Now, we're not confusing Imhotep with this guy from the Mummy movie. This is a different Imhotep. Imhotep was not only an architect, but he was also the physician to the pharaoh Dozier. And over time, his reputation grew that he actually was considered almost a god, just like Asclepius. So that's how we get the idea of from deity to commodity. Unfortunately, now we have to go back to the commodity. And to do that, we need to jump in our DeLorean, come back to the 20th century, just a little bit before World War II in the 30s. And what we need to do to understand where we are today, as usual, you need to look back. And so we need to talk a little bit about the history of healthcare insurance in the United States. So now we're in the 30s. Health insurance, healthcare is pretty cheap. And the fact of the matter is that insurers are really not interested. Why are they not interested? Because only sick people want insurance. And if you're in the insurance business, you understand this is not a good thing. This is called adverse selection, because you're going to have people buying your product and they're actually going to use it. That's not what you want. You want them buying your product, you want them paying you the premium and not using it. And actually that was part of the ACA as well, the Affordable Care Act, but we'll come back to that later. So that's called, and we need to know this term, that's called adverse selection. We'll come back to that. And so that all changed, however, during World War II. There was a lot of inflation during World War II, and President Roosevelt in 1942, to control inflation, signed the Stabilization Act. And the Stabilization Act essentially froze wages. And so that created a problem. So if you're an employer, how are you going to encourage people to come and work for you? Well, what you would do is you couldn't increase their salary, but you could offer them benefits. And the one benefit they were offered was, in fact, health insurance. So the carrot to get someone to come and work in your company was, well, I'll give you health insurance. So now we've gone from a situation where only sick people want health insurance to a bunch of young people that are healthy and aren't going to use it. So all of a sudden, that adverse selection thing, hasta la vista, baby, it's gone. And that makes the insurers very happy. And then to make sure this really worked even better, McCarran and Ferguson got together, Republican and Democrat, and they signed, and they created the McCarran-Ferguson Act in 1945. So what was that? Well, the McCarran-Ferguson Act essentially protected the insurers from the Sherman Antitrust Act. So now they could collude, and they continue to do this. They all fix their prices, although we'll come back to that later and talk a little bit more about it. So did this work? Well, in 1940, 10% of Americans had health insurance. Moved to 1955, 70%. So yeah, it did work. But you have to remember, this was essentially major medical insurance. If you went to the hospital, that was going to be covered. But an office visit in those days was like $5, although $5 is $5, but still nothing compared to today. Drugs were cheaper, and you already saw this. Dave and I found the same slide on the internet for low tech, so technology was not a big deal. So in those days, you paid the doctor, you bring him a chicken, it's sort of funny, when I decided to go into medicine, I was thinking, well, why, people say, why do you want to go into medicine? I say, well, I think I like it. I think I can help people, and eventually they can pay me any way they want. You know, and I lived in a country place, so chickens were a definite possibility, maybe eggs. So they pay you, and then the insurance company would pay the patient back, and we had our usual and customary fee. So that was a good thing. And the important thing here, if you look at that, is that in this situation, the doctor-patient relationship is intact. You're dealing directly with the patient. And then the insurance company is dealing with their client, which is the patient. That obviously has changed quite a bit. Well, that was a good system. And then along comes July 30th, 1965. And that's when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Mills Bill that created Medicare. Everything was changed then. The interesting thing is back then, in 1965, 15% of people over 65 were uninsured. So that means 85 were actually insured. And that's a similar number to the Affordable Care Act. So, and life expectancy was only 66. So the government really didn't think they were going to be on the hook for much. I mean, they sign up and then they die. So what the heck? So, and they figured that this would cost about $500 million. $500 million. And in fact, Johnson stated he would look like the worst kind of damn fool if it cost more than that. I can't do a Texas accent. Maybe somebody could help me with that. But anyway, just a few years later, it's now up to $13 billion. The costs kept going up. Well, why did they go up? Well, a lot of advanced technology came along. We had coronary artery bypass, transplants, CT, and MRI. And I put the Beatles in there because the Beatles actually helped bankroll the development of the CT. Now, in 1986, 21 years later, life expectancy is now 75, and Medicare budget is now $106 billion. So this is a problem. There are too many people living too long, using too much expensive technology, with no skin in the game. This is a perfect storm. So now we have, remember that term, adverse selection? We're back to adverse selection, big time. And it's complicated by moral hazard. Moral hazard is no skin in the game because now the Medicare patients can pretty much have what they want. So this created a problem for the government. So how are we going to control this? So they turned to this fellow named William Shaw. William Shaw was the actuary at the Connecticut General Insurance Company. Eventually, he became the head actuary of Medicare. And then he also became a professor of economics at Harvard, and he was a consultant to Carter, Nixon, and Ted Kennedy on national health insurance. He came up with the idea of the resource-based relative value scale, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because they had to figure out how they were going to pay physicians. Are they going to pay them with cowrie shells? Cowrie shells apparently were one of the earlier forms of exchange on this planet. Or they could pay us maybe with galactic credits. How about Bitcoin? Boy, I wish I'd bought some Bitcoin a while ago. Anyway, or chickens. But no, we're not going to pay doctors like that. They're not going to pay us with that. They're going to pay us with relative value units, RVUs. So Shaw, how did this all come about? So Shaw rounded up his buddies in the Department of Economics and Statistics, and he told them, we have to come up with some sort of a system to help control costs. And so they are going to try to find some sort of an objective method to value physician services. That's an admirable thing. Why not? First, they thought they would actually look at the real cost. That's what I would do. That makes sense. Let's find out how much it costs to do a carpal tunnel, and then we'll figure out how we can pay for that, right? Well, the problem is this is way back in the 80s, and they didn't have access to enough data. They couldn't even find out how much that costs. You know, computers back then were not what they are today. So they couldn't do that. So they said, well, if we can't do that, let's look at the relative costs. We can't deal with real data, but we'll figure this out. So they came up with the idea of quantifying the relative costs of physician services. And they came up with this idea of magnitude estimation. Well, what's that? Well, magnitude estimation is when you compare one object to another, and you say, well, if this is worth this, how do they compare? What will they be worth? So it's like comparing apples and oranges. But here's something, also magnitude estimation. How much do you think a Lamborghini should cost? Well, should be valued as a Porsche, a Ferrari, a Bugatti? Well, for me, this is a relative value system, so I think the Lambo is about the same as a Ferrari. But, we're not buying cars here. We're talking about this. If a carpal tunnel is X, how much should a total knee be? So that's the relative value system that we're talking about. So what Shao did is he rounded up a bunch of physicians and took them to Baltimore and hid them away in hotel rooms. And he said, you guys have to help develop this relative value system. And so what they came up with was that a relative value would be based on physician work, practice expense, and professional liability insurance. So let's look at physician work. Physician work essentially is based on four things: the technical skill and physical effort. That's good, but it's sort of hard to quantify, but we still try to do that. Mental effort and judgment, hard to quantify again. Stress due to potential risk, i.e. getting sued, you might be able to put a dollar amount on, and actually, interestingly enough, it doesn't really represent much of the healthcare dollar, at least for us. But this is the big one, time. You should have no illusions. You are all hourly workers. We are on the clock, because that's easy to measure. It's all about the time. So let's look at the system. So now we've got work, we can calculate that. We got practice expense, liability insurance. What about this? Opportunity costs and debt. Initially, they did look at this. So what exactly does that mean? So that means we should take into consideration the education debt. And in the United States right now, when you graduate from medical school, the average is about $200,000. Now, I was talking to my residents in Northwestern, and I threw this number up, and somebody threw their hand up and said, no, her debt was $400,000. But I went, I did a little more research, but this is sort of the average number across the board, but I was impressed. So, okay, so we got a debt of $200,000, and let's see what the loss is gonna be. So we got Mario the plumber, and then we got John the hand surgeon. Mario starts working at 18, and John just graduates, so now he's got to go to medical school, he's got to do his residency and his fellowship. John hangs out his shingle when he's 33 or 34, and during that time, Mario made $800K, right? And John made some money too, but the opportunity cost for John is $500,000. But what about that $200,000 of student debt? So now he gets out into the workforce behind the 8 ball, to the tune of $700,000. And you all, this has been talked about quite a bit during the past several years. Now, it gets worse, because this was supposed to be embedded in the RBRVS system. But no, they didn't put it in. Hasta la vista. I don't know where that went, but it's not in the rules. All right, so that's work. What about practice expense? Practice expense is your overhead. And practice expense is calculated by CMS with a 19-step calculation that I've actually studied. And I'm going to teach you about it right now. Just kidding. No, I'm not going to do that. But there's an important aspect of this, and that is called the embedded budget neutrality adjustment. So the federal government, what it does, it looks at how much money it spent last year, how much money it thinks it's going to spend next year, and then unless Congress gives more money to Medicare, they have to stay in the budget. So they need to fudge the numbers a little bit to maintain what they call budget neutrality. So the numbers I'm going to give you right now are for this year. So currently, in order to maintain the budget, they are discounting your direct expenses. You all know direct expenses, that's if you come in, that's a Band-Aid, that's any stuff you're going to throw away, those are your direct expenses. They're discounting those 40%. They're discounting your indirect expenses 61%. So let's add that together, that's about 50%. So what that means is that they say, you guys are doing great, we love what you're doing for us, we know it cost you $100, but we're going to pay you $50. How does that work? How is that possible that that can work? Anyway, so that's one of the problems. So the question is, Shao was really the little engine that could, but should he have done it? Should we have a resource-based relative value scale for lawyers, for example? Yeah, I don't think they'll buy into that. Anyway, so while I've been looking at this, I questioned the idea of this relative value thing. Did Shao just make that up? Where's that come from? Well, actually, it has a basis in economics. Here's a picture of Ludwig von Mises, and he actually is from the Austrian School of Economics, but eventually he came to the University of Chicago. And in 1920, he wrote the following. He said, "There is no way to calculate the relative value of services and products outside of a free market." I'm reading this to you because it's important. So that's the first line. There is no, and this is key, there is no intrinsic universal value of a service or product. Important to know. There is only the perceived value as defined by the individual consumer. And that's true. And if you don't want to believe Ludwig von Mises, jump back in the DeLorean, go back to 1776, and Adam Smith stated that the market is the most efficient at determining the natural price. So with that background, what was the goal of the RBRVS? Well, we know it's sort of to save money, but this is nicely outlined in his Chow's 1988 paper. He stated he wanted to standardize payments, rationalize incentives, and influence physician decisions. This is like a little sociology experiment. Provide neutral incentive structure. So he wants to create a system that's not going to encourage you to do too much or too little. That's just do the right amount. And this is awesome. Enhance cost effectiveness and ameliorate manpower shortage in primary care. This is 1988. They're saying the same thing now. Nothing has changed. So, translation. The translation is the government needs to control costs. And they also want to take money from proceduralists, that's you, and give it to primary care. This goes on today. So the RBRVS pretends maybe to calculate the intrinsic value of your services, but the fact of the matter is that there is no intrinsic value because RBRVS ignores the value perceived by the patient. So let me give you a concrete example. This is a painting called Interchange by William de Kooning, 1955. And you look at it, you know, it's got nice red pigment is expensive, blue's a little bit expensive, white's pretty big. He had to buy the canvas. That might have cost him a few $100s. Well, to somebody, the intrinsic value, not the intrinsic value, because there isn't any, the value was $300 million. Well, you all heard about the guy that bought the banana for $6.2 million, right? Yeah, and then he ate it. Well, anyway. So the bottom line is, as of 1989, the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act marks the end of the physician or market-based physician fees. That is because that's when the RBRVS became the law of the land. And so you say, well, you're boring me. I want to go get some coffee. How does this affect me? Well, currently, your hand practice expense, your PE, your practice expense per hour, according to the government, based on data from 2007, it's being redone, is $193.08 an hour, okay? Your current conversion factor, now the conversion factor is the number, if you have an RVU, you multiply that by the conversion factor, and that's what you're going to get within the federal system. It's currently $32.35 per RVU. That's not much more than it was in 1990. I have another slide, but I'm not going to bore you with it because there's only so much bad news I can give you. So let's see how this impacts you. So if you do an ORIF, a distal radius, how much you making within the Medicare system? You're losing $18 an hour. Trigger finger, you're losing about $45. But if you do it in the office, you actually make money because the practice expense in the office is higher than it is in the facility. How about a new office visit? About 30 bucks in the hole. Established, 30 bucks in the hole. There's more. So along comes Obamacare in 2010. And Obamacare was meant to create a value-based payment. And I always found that interesting because I always thought we were trying to provide value. And also it was clear that fee-for-service was evil then, is evil now, and will always be evil. And the other thing, the ACA was supposed to push you into advanced alternative payment models. That's 2010. 5 years later, MACRA comes along and just takes it to a new level. What does MACRA stand for? The Medicare Access CHIP. CHIP means Children's Health Insurance Program Reauthorization Act. Notice the word access. Now this was thought to be a great bill. It was supported by both parties. It was meant to replace this thing called a sustainable growth rate. And every year, going back to that budget neutrality thing, they would calculate the sustainable growth rate, and then they would adjust the conversion factor to maintain that sustainable growth rate. The problem was that it always was leading to like a 5% or 10% decrease in what you were going to get paid, and Congress just never passed it. They just kept kicking the can down the road. So everybody thought, well, let's do something about that. So they came up with this thing called the Quality Payment Program, QPP. And what that did is it took all the aspects of the ACA, the Physician Quality Reporting System, the EHR, the Value-Based Measurement Program, and created this thing called MIPS, which is Merit-Based Incentive Payment System. And that is still out there today. And MACRA was supposed to do the following. It was supposed to promote participation in certain APMs. APMs are advanced payment models. We'll come back to that. And it was supposed to be patient-centered. I always found that interesting. I didn't know we didn't care about our patients. I guess now that we have macro, we can care about our patients. I'm pleased about that. And then it's supposed to minimize the burden on physicians. Now, we all know that worked out, right? Yeah, not really. It just got worse. Anyway, so what were the impacts? So this is a slide that tells you where this went up until this year. And if you were in the MIPS program, you could either get a 9%, up to a 9% boost in your Medicare payments if you played the games and you did all the stuff you were supposed to do, or you could get hit. You could get dinged as well. It's a zero-sum game, and there are going to be some losers, some winners and some losers. If you think about it, if everybody's doing it correctly, they're not going to be able to afford it. So the answer to avoid the MIPS downside is to get into an advanced payment model. And you'll see why that would work, because if you're in that, there's no downside. It's all upside. It's all 5%, and that works. So you notice these arrows stop in 24, but we're in 25. So there's new legislation that gives you an idea where we're going to go with this. So in 2024, if you were an APM, you got a bump of 1.88%. Last time I checked, inflation was much more than that. 2025, this year, you get a bump of 3.5%, and down the line. So here we go. In 2026, 3.523, 4.28, and now check this out. In 2028, the bottom drops out. They're going to increase it only by 0.75%. And look at MIPS. All the way along, you can make up to 9% more on your Medicare billings. So this is Paul Spitalnik. He was the chief actuary at CMS when MACRA came out. And he wrote an article about the impact of MACRA. And this is what he stated. Physician payment updates are not expected to keep pace with the average rate of physician cost increases. We expect access to Medicare participating physicians to become a significant issue in the long term. So, MACRA creates a problem for access. And that's just not me saying that. The Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, MedPAC, you all know what MedPAC is? It's a group of independent folks that report to Congress about how Medicare is going. So they're sort of trying to make Medicare work, and they look at this, and they say MIPS cannot be saved. They state that it's burdensome and complex, information is not meaningful, will not improve value, and will not reward value-based care. Now remember, the MedPAC just puts this stuff out, and then what Congress does with it is up to them. So now, my question was, MACRA came in 2015. We're now 10 years out, nearly 10 years out. Well, did it work? Well, the answer is no. And that's based on some recent studies, particularly by Cooper et al. At Yale. And they looked at MIPS, and they did a meta-analysis of lots of different reports. And what they saw that there was no improvement in quality, no decrease in spending, no increase in value. Now, that's for MIPS. As far as the advanced alternate payment systems, there was a modest cost saving of up to 5%. After that level, there would be an adverse impact on the quality. There was no evidence that the financial incentives induced physicians to join these APMs, and the ease with which physicians now, remember that graph I showed you, the ease and the compensation for staying in MIPS is so great that now people are going to be less incentivized to go into APMs. Do you all know what APMs are? No. Alternative payment models are sort of a capitated system where you get money, and then your group, it has to be a large group, you have to manage how that money is handled, and you have to accept some of the risk. And it really applies more to internal medicine, but they also exist for orthopedics. For hand surgery, not so much. So trust me, you're all looking so sad. I'm so sorry. Now it's going to get better, but I have to just finish this up. So the resource-based relative value scale that's been around forever really doesn't hit the mark, as we've seen. Practice expense is discounted. The ACA is actually not affordable. And Medicare access, CHIP Reauthorization Act really limits access. So this is something like out of Newspeak in 1984. So where are we with physician value? Well, I'm afraid, at least in the federal programs, it's less. And so if you want to see what the bottom line is on that, how do we compare to other professions? You are currently getting paid 0.04 RVUs per minute for your work. That comes out to about $85 an hour. So let's see how much a police officer makes. Well, about $38.46. If you're playing for the Cubs, $721 an hour. If you're the CEO of a hospital, $3,000 an hour. And this is a little bit dated, but when Mark Bartoli left, it was at Aetna, he was making $18,000 an hour. So we're not there. Anyway, this is the positive aspect. What has happened? McCarran-Ferguson, which allowed the insurance companies to collude without worry about the Sherman Antitrust Act, that's been repealed. And it actually has had an impact. As of October of last year, there was a $2.8 billion antitrust settlement against Blue Cross Blue Shield, and that was brought by practitioners. This, in October 12, 2017, Trump signed this executive order that allowed small business groups to form intra and interstate health insurance plans, because before that they couldn't do that. That would be a good thing, because that increases competition and hopefully goes against the juggernauts like Aetna. As soon as Joe Biden came in, he repealed it. What about physician-owned hospitals? That's another source of possible revenue for you all. Well, when the ACA came along, it outlawed physician-owned hospitals unless you already owned one. But on two occasions, in 2017 and again, I think in 2024, the Patient Access to Higher Quality Healthcare Act has been introduced in Congress. Unfortunately, it has crashed and burned, but a new Congress is with us, so hopefully that'll come along. The other thing that I don't know how many of you are involved with ambulatory care centers, but in Chicago, how many of you have ambulatory care centers? Yeah, okay. So in some states, you have to have a certificate of need, which significantly impacts on the ability to have these. I remember at Northwestern, some people from California came to our office and said, yeah, you know what, let's create an ambulatory surgical center here right near Northwestern. Yeah, that went nowhere. We got crushed. That was not going to happen. So anyway, but the good news is that 27 states don't have CONs, and there are 3 states that are now getting rid of them. So that's a good trend. So you could ask, well, what's going to happen? Well, my impression is that, going back to Spitalnik, unless there's a problem, there's a crisis with access, I don't see the system changing significantly. So just a few more thoughts, almost done. So I just want to end on a positive note. Where's Carolyn? Carolyn Dela Cruz was on the airplane with me. I was talking to her about this. She said, Nagle, you can't do that. You got to give them something positive. So here, I'm trying. All right. So we're not the problem. If you look at this, and this is from CMS, physician and clinical services only represents 20% of the healthcare spend dollar. You notice hospital care is larger, and even prescription drugs is about 9%. And there are some things that we just aren't responsible for. Senescence, it costs money to get older. Older patients use more resources, and there's nothing we can do about that. Although I'm reading Ray Kurzweil. You know Ray Kurzweil? He thinks that eventually we're all going to be immortal, so just hang in there. Maybe by 2050. I'll be really old then. And obesity costs a lot of money, although now we have Ozempic. And what can you say about lifestyle, sex, drugs, and rock and roll that cost money? But we are the good guys, and if you don't believe me, you can look at the Gallup poll of honesty and ethics in the professions. This is done every year. So in 2024, the most recent data shows that in the last place, who do you think? That's right, Congress and used car salesmen. Yeah. Who do you think's in first? Nurses, that's right. And I've been watching this for a while, and they're always there. Unfortunately, we've dropped from 2 to 5. But for me, this guy's always number 1, so, I'm not done. I have one last thought. It's all doom and gloom, and you think all I care about is the money, but I don't. When I went into medicine, like I said, I thought people would just pay me with whatever they're going to pay, and you get out of bed in the morning, and you really do some good stuff, right? You really do good stuff. So you shouldn't be so concerned about how much, we should be concerned, but don't go crazy about the fact that when you do that case you did, with you restored that guy's hand. Isn't that amazing? So even though that may not fill your bank account, that satisfaction and the joy you get from that should at least fill your soul. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Oh, come to Washington. Thanks, Dave. And you're all crying. Prozac is being given in the bag.
It is.
You should have drunk more.
There's SSRIs distributed in the back. Dan, thank you so much for being the Danyo lecturer. And for all of you, he has done an immense amount of work on physician compensation. And every time that he calls me and asks me to participate in a ruck, not Roosh, but in a ruck, it's always to our benefit. So if you ever get a call to participate in a ruck, go ahead and help out.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I appreciate it, Tim. Thank you.